At the same time, in that briefing yesterday, the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cluster calling on social media users to use social media responsibly. The cluster says individuals who use social media to send threatening messages as well as incite violence or even cause harm to others will be charged. Now, this also includes videos or sharing of posts to the public that may contain speech or conduct that may encourage others to commit public offences or even violence. So does this mean that all the social media posts will be monitored, or is there any other way for them to be able to do this? So Jean Roux, Atlantic Council Digital Forensic Research Lab and Research Associate for Sub-Saharan Africa, joins us live now. Jean, thank you so much for your time. I mean, firstly, before I even ask you how they're going to be able to do this for you, is this a good move?
I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, we saw what can and could happen and happened actually during the July unrest in 2021. And I think a lot of this, what we're seeing now from government side, is trying to preempt a lot of that. There was some interesting reporting done, and I think some good reporting from the South African Human Rights Commission on the government's conduct around the July unrests and kind of where they fell short of monitoring things like social media for posts that could incite violence and could incite, unrest as a result. As we're going into the elections this year, we kind of see an echo of that coming through.
And I suppose, I'm going to get to the July unrest in just a moment, but at a practical level. So someone is thinking tonight, so if I'm going to be posting on social media, does it mean that there's someone who's up there watching every single thing that we're posting, or is there a way that this can be done?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one, big brother or eye in the sky that's keeping track of every single thing that everyone posts. But you do get, the same algorithms and the same AI tools that's used to show you your timeline, for example, could be repurposed to highlight keywords, to identify things like hate speech and false information. So that once they're flagged for prosecutors, for people who do keep a lookout, such as we do, such as the IEC, such as organizations like Media Monitoring Africa, that there are people who can flag this and kind of follow up on to see whether they would actually meet the threshold of hate speech, false information, and the like.
And what's that threshold?
I mean, that'll often depend on the case. So, it's often the trickiest part is linking a particular post to an actual real-world, event. So it's not as easy as looking at a social media post calling for violence and then being able to say, well, look here, it actually happened. You need to show that that post actually caused or was the result or resulted in that violence happening. So not always that easy, but it is something that can be taken into account. And obviously, this will depend from one case to the next. It'll depend from the type of transgression that you're looking at. If it's just false news about a voting station, for example, the threshold might be lower than looking at actual incitement to violence that actually causes damage or loss of life.
Quite an interesting one. I mean, someone hardly even thinks about the threshold and what the limitations could be there then. But looking at the July unrest, for example, there are people who are saying that no, but when we see some of the posts that would be circulating on social media, for example, there are individuals, according to them, who should have also been charged alongside others who would have been charged at the time. So how important will it be then for authorities to do this one correctly and to ensure that each and every single individual that could potentially be a person of interest or is seen to be breaching that threshold to then be brought to book?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where this question of impartiality and, it actually comes in. Because you've got a government, and I mean, I'm very reticent of handing over the reins of something like this to a government because they've always got this vested interest, trying to protect themselves and their own party's interest as a result. And I think that was one of the criticisms around the July unrest was, specific people were targeted, others were kind of left, some very prominent figures weren't given the same treatment as, some other social media users were. So having a consistent and an equitable application of this is paramount, and also weighing up whatever does come out of this, against our constitutional principles, and making sure the free speech isn't impinged as a result, that you don't have, this being used as a way of, forcing down and clamping down on discussion and fair criticism kind of through the back door almost.
And that's quite an important point, because I was going to go there, because one of the things they appealed to as the security cluster is that political leaders must be cautious when they're speaking in public, as well as to not incite violence and all of that. But when then does it become incitement, but also at the same time, as you say, not impede on somebody's freedom of speech, especially if someone is maybe criticizing those who would be in government in whatever province they're probably campaigning in?
Yeah, I mean, to give you a good example of that, I mean, we've got legislation in place that prevents and criminalizes any information of any false information around the elections, where to vote, how to vote, what you should be taking with you. Now, that shouldn't be, construed as a blanket ban on criticism of the IEC, for example. So if we do find lapses, where the IEC might not have brought enough ballots to a voting station, that is something that can and should be highlighted. And I mean, when it comes to things like social media, it's again that visual of a double-edged sword. Social media is a very good way of getting these type of things out there into the light very quickly. People can just whip out their phones and take a photo of something that could be valid criticism. But at the same time, when you get people sharing false information around this and using these same tools to perpetuate and spread false information around it, that's where it becomes an issue and where it becomes a concern.
Sure. And what does it mean then, because people sometimes do say, but I did not originate the post. For example, I simply just shared it for other users to see. So how much responsibility then do I bear if I choose to share that post?
I mean, my point of view is always, if you're sharing something, if you're retweeting, if you are liking it even, all of that can count as a publication. You're basically perpetuating that message in any event. There's actually some quite interesting research done by Professor Herman Wasserman from the University of Stellenbosch around why people do this, how they share false information, even knowing that it's false, because there's this sense of civic duty that they've got. So it's a very nuanced and a very complex issue, as simple as it might seem. But, my position is always think twice before you share anything. If you think that it might not be true, or there is a chance that it couldn't be, rather hold off and check. There's a lot of resources online from the IEC, from organizations like Media Monitoring Africa, even from the media itself, bringing in electoral literacy, as it were, and to make sure that you are aware and check the facts before you actually share that.
So think before you post and think before you share. So thank you so much, Jean. And as you say, it's sort of simple as that. So I do hope then that we get to speak again closer to the elections, because there's a lot of information that is circulating in the public domain. But thank you so much for insights. Do appreciate them this evening. That was Jean Roux, Atlantic Council Digital Forensic Research Lab, and he's the Research Associate for Sub-Saharan Africa. So please do think before you post or before you share.